All right, guys, in today's video, we're working on this 2013 Chevrolet Avalanche, and we're diagnosing a knocking sound on hard acceleration, like, taking off from a stop. It's not loud enough for me to capture it for you on my headset microphone, but it's a pretty common problem, and I'm going to show it to you on visual inspection, because the problem is with the engine mount, at least on the driver's side. There's 3 engine mounts on this particular series of vehicle. One on the driver's side engine block, another one just like it on the passenger side engine block, and then a different design one at the end of the transmission. And those 3 points are how the powertrain mounts to the frame. The engine mount on this model is sitting underneath this square-shaped heat shield that you see here with my finger. And what I'm going to do to show you the problem is I'm going to snake a inspection camera down here and route it right underneath the steering shaft and underneath that heat shield. And right away, we can see very clearly that there's a crack along the top of this. Now, I want you to be able to see that this is not a cosmetic problem that you should ignore. So let me find a way to fix this camera here, and then I'm going to go inside and start the engine. And what I'm going to show you is this whole mount is very likely, it's what I expect to see, it's going to separate when we start up the engine and give it a little gas. So let me get something to hold this camera put so it won't move while we do that. All right, guys, we just gently vice gripped the end of the inspection camera to the heat shield on the motor mount. And so you guys watch the camera, and it should stay put during the starting sequence now. All I'm going to do is start the engine, and I'm going to press the brake, and I'm going to put it in drive, and I'm just going to give it a little bit of gas. And so what you can see with that is that motor mount is separating. And there's a safety bar at the top of it. When we get it out, you'll see it. And the clunking, which is hard to hear on the headset microphone I got, particularly because I was inside. But when it separates out, it's retained by that safety pin, and that's the sound that you hear. So let's go ahead and inspect the other 2. And then, all right, guys, we're over here on the passenger side. If we zoom in down here, that's the center bolt on the mount. That's about all you can see. You can't even see the heat shield. It's so cramped and cluttered over here. So in order to actually do the inspection on this guy, it's going to be a little bit more straightforward to come through the wheel well. So let's just kind of scan down over here where the passenger side tire is, and come right down here. And what I've done is I've just got the flashlight sitting here to kind of illuminate things. And I've got our inspection camera to where I can manipulate it like this. And you guys are going to watch on the camera here. We set it up here on top of the tire. And so you guys can get a view of this. Now I'm going to turn this flashlight off because it's a little bit too washed out. And so with the camera in here, right, there's the upper bolt that holds the mount on. This is the one closest to the firewall. And then we can see the top of the rubber nail. Don't see any cracks at all along the top edge. We can also look around the bottom here. All right, so you got this lower section and this upper section. This upper section is up, like right here, you can see on the top left corner of the view on the camera. It's hard to get a view to the top of that, but that's what you've got to be able to do to know if this is good or not. Just give me a second to get this manipulated properly. There we go. All right, so that there, all the way over, up on top here, we're in good shape, right? So we're interested in this piece that's above that ridge. This lower area of rubber almost never goes. And this one's old and it's dirty, and there's a few, like some heat cracks on the outer edge on this lower piece, but I don't really care about that. What I care about is this upper piece where the mount is actually molded into what attaches to the engine. Yep, right there. And this guy looks fine. If we even saw a heat crack up here, I'd be inclined to replace it. But I don't see any problem here, so this one can stay. So why did we inspect this guy? Well, when you have the driver's side go out, it can put some additional stress on the mount on the passenger side, and it is possible for it to cause this one to prematurely fail. And if they both go, then the one I'm about to show you next at the rear of the transmission can be compromised. So this guy looks okay. Just trying to get one more upper view here. Yep, this guy looks okay, and we'll go ahead and check the rear one by the transmission. That's the last one. All right, we're at the rear of the transmission. This is a four-wheel drive vehicle, so here's our transfer case. And then right here at the tail of the transmission is the third mount. So this mount attaches with bolt here and here to the tail of the transmission, and then attaches to this cross member on the frame. This bottom part is steel, this top part is steel, and then it's held together and molded with this rubber. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I don't know if I can get a way to show you, but if you push on the side here, this is rubber, it's moving in. And so what we're looking for is any cracks along this entire top part. If you see anything that looks like a crack, you can get a pry bar in here and just gently give it a tug and see if it opens up. I don't see anything on the front here. I'm going to need to kind of come in on the back side and check that before we can call it done. But I think this one's fine, and this one's not required to be replaced unless it is obviously damaged on visual inspection. All right, so there's the mounting bolt, and we're just going to use the inspection camera to look around the back side of this rubber all the way down on this rear mount. And then we can also use it to take a look at the side on both sides. And we don't see any damage at all. This one's good. So the first thing we're going to remove is this steering shaft here. We've got a 15 and a 15 nut, and then a 15 and a 15 nut up here. The first thing I'm going to do is mark these so that we get them back into their exact spot when we put the stuff back together again. Use yellow at the top, and we'll use blue here at the bottom. And the next thing I'm going to show you is inside the cab. So let's go inside the cab. All right, we're going to need some way to secure the steering wheel so it doesn't move. We're protecting the leather steering wheel up here with a clean shop towel, and then we're just using a bungee. So it doesn't have to be super tight. We just want this to stay relatively still while we manipulate the shaft under the hood. All right, taking a couple of 15s, got a 15 socket on a breaker bar, and then we got a 15 ratchet here. We're just going to try to get this guy loosened up to where we can turn it by hand. And then we're going to end up doing the same thing at the top. All right, that one's where I want it to be. Get this guy on this one. All right, those are loosened up. Gonna get another wrench in here so I can work this off. So I'm gonna work these two bolts off and we'll bring you guys back. All right, this is loose enough to finish off the rest of the way by hand. Slide this bolt out. And we're gonna put it back the way we found it. Bolt head towards the passenger side, nut towards the driver's side. And similarly on this one, on this one we got the special nut that faces the passenger side, and the bolt head faces the driver's side. Does it matter? Probably not. Is that how they built on the assembly line? Yes. So that's why we're going to put it back that way. All right. Now we got to try to get this sleeve on both ends out. All right, so the bottom's out and the top's out. And so now we know which end is which because of our paint colors. All right, this guy right there. Next, we're going to get a 10 millimeter, and we're going to remove these bolts holding on this exhaust manifold heat shield. All right, now I got a warning for you on this. There's a possibility that these little bolts can break off, but we've got to get this heat shield out of the way to do the job. So I'm just going to kind of feel, right? If I don't, these things are only held on in inch-pounds. So if we get a lot of resistance on any one of them, then we know that we need to be extra careful so they don't break. The other thing I'll tell you do with these, let me get this guy out and I'll show you. You can zoom into him. Right, this kind of corrosion you see is cosmetic. We don't care about that. What we're interested in is if we see corrosion at the neck of the fastener, so where the threaded portion comes into the head, then you're going to have to discard the fastener and replace it because it'll be too dangerous for it to break off inside the exhaust manifold while you're putting it back on or when you do this job again next time. I'll put a link to the part number for the correct bolt in the video description. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep removing these, and we'll bring you guys back when we get done. This one wasn't even on tight. Yay! Hopefully that's a omen of good news for this job, because this job can be a pisser, at least on the passenger side for sure. The driver's side's not too bad. So far our bolts look fine, so I think we're going to be A-okay on this job. So again, I'll bring you back when we get the last bolt. All right, this guy in the very, very back, we can't get a socket on. So we're going to need a 10 millimeter ratcheting wrench. And naturally, this is the last one, and he's super tight. Super tight. All right. Let me see if I can get in a better position, and maybe with a 1/4 inch socket. I don't want to put any leverage on here, so in case it's stuck, we don't want to break it. We'll try a 1/4 inch. All right, what we got back here in the back here is a 1/4 inch drive 10 millimeter socket and a 1/4 inch breaker bar. So I'm going to grab a small hammer and we'll see if we can persuade this rusty fastener to let go without breaking. That's all I want to try. It moved. I'm going to come back here. It's a constant fight with this light. Hopefully you guys can see. Come back here with a 10 millimeter ratcheting wrench. Okay, yay, it's turning. What if this hadn't freed it up? Well, if this hadn't freed it up, we would have next went to get some heat and give it some persuasion that way. So it's still a good fastener. It just had some corrosion right at the head, the base of the head. Now, why are we taking all this stuff out? Some of you may be wondering. Well, this is a four-wheel drive vehicle. There's no way this mount's coming out from the bottom because there's all the four-wheel drive axle shaft and transfer area there, so we're going to have to bring it out up on top. This is basically what the service manual would recommend you do as well. The only thing I'm doing different in the service manual is they would have suggested removing this upper piece of the shaft. I'm going to see if we can get away with leaving that. All right, so now we've got fairly good access to this mount, all things considered. See if I can find, again, a place for the flashlight to be happy. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I have access to the fasteners. So there's 3 15s that mount to the frame. There's one here, one here, one here, and another one over there. And then there's 4 that mount fasten the mount to the engine block. 2 on top and 2 on the bottom. So I'm going to go find the appropriate combination of sockets and extensions to get these, and I'll show you removing them. All right, so looking at the camera here, you can see I've got one of these fasteners with the inspection camera in view. And I'm just going to kind of come down here with a particular socket setup. If I can just one-hand it here so I can film for you guys. All right. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm just trying to see for each of these fasteners. This one up on the upper rear, and this one in the upper front, and then this one in the lower front, and this one in the lower rear. Just trying to make sure that we have a setup that we can get on each one of these. If we pull the camera back a little bit. So for the upper one, what I found worked was a small 15 and then a 1-inch extension and then a 3-inch extension. That happens to fit the uppers and give you enough clearance. Now this little ratchet here is not going to be enough leverage, so what I'm going to have to combine that with is an extender. All right, so I'm going to have to combine it with this tool to give me enough leverage to break those fasteners free of their clamping force. And that's all I'm trying to do right now. I just want to loosen them up and then retighten them so that we don't have to put as much force on it after we raise the engine. So what I'm going to do is loosen and then slightly tighten the 4 that attach to the block. And then for the 3 that attach to the frame, I'm going to use a setup like this. Bring this into view. What I finally decided on was this is an extension that I would normally use if I was working on a transmission and trying to pull the bell housing bolts. This is something that would normally let you reach over the transmission and get the bell housing bolts. And we're going to put a 15 on the end of this. Pop it off this other one just for a second. And then for these ones that are in the front, this is the easiest way to get those. Right? So there's the middle one, for example. We'll be able to get these 3 loosened up very easily. There's the middle one. There's the forward one. And then for the very back one here, we're going to have to come either under the master cylinder or behind the master cylinder. I haven't decided yet. Or you might have to have a little swivel on the end. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen those 3 as well. I'll bring you back when we have those loosened up. Just showing you that one that's attached to the frame, closest to the firewall. We're just coming right in behind the master cylinder here. We're not putting any pressure on it at all. There's our level sensor. And there is our brake line right here. We're not putting any pressure on it whatsoever. Plenty of clearance. I can get my finger in here. And then right past these brake lines, again, no pressure on any of this. Dead on to that last fastener all the way down there at the bottom. And then we're just kind of loosening him up. And when I feel like he's pretty loose and we've broken the original thread locker, I'm just going to turn it in the other direction and tighten it back down. All right, we got all of these loosened up at this point. And what I found I had to do in order to loosen the bottom ones on the left and the right side is I have to remove these chassis bolts that attach the frame to the, attach the mount to the frame. At this point, I've moved a jack underneath the vehicle, and I'm going to show you where that's positioned for the best likelihood of not causing any damage to the oil pan. This is an RPO LC9 engine, so it's an all aluminum block. The oil pan is aluminum on all of them, I think, though. Before we go down there, the last piece of disassembly, we're going to remove what GM calls the sight shield. It's like an engine cover. And the reason for that is we jack it up, we don't want this to get pinched in the back and damaged. Give us a little bit more room back there. All right, let's go underneath. Let me show you the positioning of the jack. All right, so we've got the jack positioned just forward of this cross member. There's your oil filter, there's your transmission, there's the oil pan. If I can get this sitting somewhere for a moment. The strongest portion of this aluminum oil pan is this cast piece around where the oil filter is. And so what we want to do is we want to have the jack towards, kind of off center. So you notice it's kind of like towards this side. We've got one long piece of wood to spread the weight. And then, actually, I notice this is not quite where I wanted it. And then we've got these blocks sitting right in front of this cross member. And then we've got this guy that's a thinner type of wood, and it's softer, running along the oil pan itself. And so as we jack this up, we will be spreading the weight along this back edge. Got the oil drain plug reinforcement on that side. And this gives us the best chance of not causing any damage to this aluminum oil pan. This is the jacking point that GM suggests in the service manual when the dealerships have these vehicles up on a lift. The only difference is we're using a hydraulic jack. They would recommend a piece of wood in this area with a screw jack. But that's obviously the type of jack you have to use when you're on a lift. All right, let's go back under the hood, and we'll show you removing this mount. All right, the hardest one to get to for this technique I'm doing is the lower one closest to the firewall. So I'm just going to get that out of the way now. And I'll show you what I had to do to get him off. Let's see if we can turn it by hand. Nope. That seems loose enough to get by hand. This is what I end up doing if we zoom back out. I ended up taking a swivel for that one. Just wrapping some painter's tape on it so that it was less swiveling and would stay kind of like that. I just needed a slight angle for that one back there. Again, a short 1-inch extension and a 3-inch, then our small 15 millimeter. So what we're going to do now, we're going to continue to take out those bolts because the weight of the mount is now on the jack. So you can't do this until you have the weight of the mount on the jack. The weight of the engine by having the jack up against that oil pan where I showed you before, so that you're taking some of the pressure off the mount, is what I meant to say. If you take those bolts out without that, then the engine's going to move and it can be dangerous. You can lose a finger or something. So just make sure the jack is secure in the place where I showed you. Triple check it, and then you can go ahead and keep pulling these bolts out. I'm going to go ahead and take out that center one going to the frame, and then I'm going to remove the other 3. If you zoom into this mount, you can see I've got it elevated about 5 millimeters off the frame. So we're going to go ahead and remove that center bolt. And then we're going to raise it a little further. So let me reach down here and grab this guy. And now we're going to jack it up about 3 times the current distance. Okay, and now we're going to remove the remaining 3 bolts. Can't really get you guys in there while I take out those bolts, but I showed you earlier the setup, and I'll show it to you again for the 2 on the top and then for the 1 on the bottom. So let me get those out, and then I'll show you the setup again. That's number 2. That's number 3. Whoops. All right, we dropped that one. Let me go fish that fastener out. All right, I told you I'd show you the setup. The lower front one is this setup with a restricted swivel and an extra 1 inch. And that way you can get a ratchet, electric ratchet in there. You can't get an electric ratchet in the back one. So we take off the 1 inch and we put a manual ratchet, and that's how we get the lower rear one. All right, at this point, the only thing holding the motor mount, or the engine mount rather, is an alignment pin that sits in the frame. So we're going to bring this engine up a little bit more so that we can clear that. And we're just watching along the back of the firewall area. We don't want to go up any higher than we have to. Let me see if that's enough. Almost. There we go. All right, now we just got to fish it out. I want to go up just a little bit more. Every millimeter helps with this kind of job. Just got to get this guy oriented a certain way. Yeah. Almost. Now let's see if we can get another millimeter or 2 out of this height. Just trying to twist this around. Yes, it's a pisser, And this is the easier of the two sides, in my opinion. All right. Got that out. Let me show you what we're replacing it with, but you can see that it's massively damaged. In fact, if we pull it down here on the ground, you can see that pin I was telling you guys about. It's running long ways here. And that's the clunking sound that more than likely was being heard. All right, let me go see if we can find that last bolt, because I didn't find it yet. And then we'll show you what we're replacing it with. All right, we're going to replace this with a GM 1585 4941. These are made in the USA, so these are the genuine OEM ones. So we can see that, we don't have that damage up near the top. This heat shield is like aluminum or something, so it's not uncommon to see these kind of bent a little bit right out of the box just from jostling around because they're so heavy. You can bend this back after we get it in place if it bothers you. All right, so there's our three that mount to the frame. And there's our four that mount to the engine block. And then what you're trying to do, I was showing you on the camera, you're trying to fish the socket through the heat shield for the two on top. And then just because of the angle on the two on the bottom, you need just a very slight bit of a swivel. And that's why I use the tape, because we don't want to have too much of a slant in it. We won't be able to get the torque wrench properly calibrated for this angle, and we definitely do need to torque this. And then this is the stud that sits in the frame. And no, we're not going to cut this off. That's like a hack. This is here for a reason. It's a safety feature in the event of a collision, and it also helps with the alignment. So we're going to put it in just the way it came out. All right, before we put the new one in, we've gone down and wiped down the mounting points where the mount attaches to the frame bracket. You don't want to have any pebbles or sand or anything getting in the way when we torque that down. And then to try and make it just a tad easier, I'm going to see if we can get away with a few more millimeters on this jack. Let's see. Of course, I have kind of forgotten how we got it out of here, so now we're going to go repeat this same dance all over again. Yeah, I think it probably came out this way. Just trying to make sure we do not pinch the little bellows boot thing here on the steering. All right. Kind of, sort of. I don't know what to tell you guys, it is just a dance. I really need it to go in like this. I don't think it's going to cooperate. Need a little bit more room. Can't get it in. The broken one was obviously a little slightly different dimension than the new one, just because of it being broken. All right, I think it's getting hung up on this little harness here. There we go. Success, maybe. Please. Yay! Now we just got to get that pin to line up. I'm going to have to try for a few more millimeters here. We're like so close. So close. We're like right there. Not sure what we're stuck on. All right, I got to get you guys out of the way so I can see what's going on down here. All right, guys, so this wiring harness, right, this guy that runs up right behind the mount. For some reason this is not coming out on the camera. There he is. So that wiring harness has got to go in front of the mount bracket. And the problem is we keep getting it behind. So we just got to work that bracket behind that harness and we should be good to go. All right, for these bolts that mount to the block, we don't need to put any thread lock or anything on them. I'm just putting a little piece of tape here to hold this. Just make sure they're clean. We're going to hand thread each one back in. All right, I did want to show you the type of socket that you should use when trying to torque these bolts for this mount. It needs to be a 6-point. A 12-point is going to be too likely when you might have this cocked just a little bit because you can't see it clearly. It could cause some damage to the fastener. So a 6-point will avoid that. All right, it was a real pisser, but we got all 4 of these torqued to 37 foot-pounds. At this point, I'm going to lower the jack and set the engine mount back on the frame bracket very slowly. All right. Now hopefully everything just lines up for these other bolts. Just double checking. It does. Now these bolts we've got to treat with a thread locking compound. So we're going to clean the old material off. It's getting kind of overcast. Hopefully it won't rain on us out here. I'm going to clean this old material off and get the threads nice and clean, and then I'll show you the thread locker compound that we're going to use. All right, we're going to give all these bolts the wire brush treatment. And then we're going to hit them up with GM 1234 5382. This is a medium strength blue thread locking compound. It only goes on these bolts that go to the frame bracket. Just like that. We can do that to all three of these, and then we're going to torque them down to 43 foot-pounds. All right. I actually misspoke earlier. These 15s that hold the mount to the frame are 48 foot-pounds, not 43. All right, there's that one. And then we're going to get this middle one. And then we're going to get the last one. Going to have to move the camera for that one. Now, since the technique I use, we do not remove the wheel or the wheel liner, we can still come in through this small opening, though. And we can see we have all three of these guys torqued down into position, and we've gotten the heat shield adjusted back to the factory positioning for any bends or dents in the installation process. I did want to also draw your attention this wiring harness that we were struggling with in the beginning up towards the front, towards the radiator side of the mount. That goes to this NOx sensor. So just be aware that you've got that sensor there and take care not to damage it while you're fiddling around with this. All right, when you go to do the torque on that very last 10 millimeter on the exhaust manifold shield, heat shield, you're going to need to use a torque wrench extender to get in there and do that. This, of course, changes the torque setting from 80 inch-pounds because you've moved the point of rotation out. If you're not familiar with those adjustments, I'll put a link to a video with the math up here in the upper right, but I can't give it to you because it's going to vary on the brand and length of the wrench you're using. All right, as you can see, we got this heat shield back in. Those 10 millimeter nuts get torqued to 80 inch-pounds. Now we're going to reinstall the steering shaft piece. Blue on blue in our case. We took a shop rag and cleaned off the end here. And then we're just going to get it up near the top. And reach up here and slide these two pieces back together. And get the bolts put in there next. This piece on the bottom, we're going to have to readjust because we've compressed this. I'm going to pull this down from the steering shaft side until we can get the hole lined up for the bolt. And put the nut on the other end, and then we'll go torque these up. All right, guys, and the torque value on the lower bolt and nut is going to be 35 foot-pounds, and the torque value on the upper bolt and special nut is going to be 37 foot-pounds. And, of course, after you get the steering shaft reinstalled and torqued, you can remove whatever you were using to secure the steering wheel. Let's take a look at the service manual for what we've done. Engine mount inspection, right? So there's some text here you can read about why this is something important. They do give you a warning here about there's a very small clearance between the oil pan, the bottom of the pan, and the oil pump pickup screen. So when you jack against the oil pan, it can cause it to be bent, and this will damage the oil pickup unit. So it's very, very important that you only jack this up in certain places. They talk about doing the inspection and how you can determine if there's a problem. They want you to make sure that all the fasteners are present and at the correct torque before you do, because that can make it look like there's a problem when there's not. And then they give you some tips on how you can test these, right? I showed you how you can look at it with the inspection camera, but you can, of course, go through and raise it up with the jack, and then you can take a look at the cosmetic surfaces with visual inspection. Heat check cracks, separation, which is what we had, rubber split through the center of the engine mount. We had both of these. And then This is just a comment about hydraulic mounts. This particular engine does not use hydraulic mounts. All right, and so then they talk about replacements, and they say L96. This is our engine RPO number, left side, and then they also talk about except L96. Ours is going to be except L96. And the reason for that, if we take a look earlier in the service manual, we can see the different engine RPO codes. So we're working on an LC9, which is a 5.3 liter, and it's an aluminum block. And then the LMG is also a 5.3 liter and a cast iron block. These two is what this video is mostly aimed at. The L96 is a 6 liter. This video is not aimed at that. And the L94 and the L9H are 6.2 liters that are aluminum. It's not directly aimed at these, but it's going to be the same procedure, although what I show you won't look exactly the same. And then if we go back to the instructions, disconnect the battery cable. Well, we didn't have to do this because we skipped some of these that are steps. I'll point out why in a minute. Remove the sight shield. We did that. Raise and support the vehicle. We did that. Remove the left wheelhouse liner. We didn't do that, and that's why we did not have to do the battery cable, because there's wiring harnesses here. They want you to disconnect the battery cable unless you damage them. So we can skip 1 and 4 in the technique I've shown you. 5, remove the engine mount to frame bolts. Remove the exhaust manifold heat shield. We did these two things. Remove the upper and lower intermediate steering shaft. I only removed the lower here, the middle. I'll show you that section of the service manual in a minute. I found it wasn't necessary to remove the upper. Position a jack and a block of wood under the engine oil pan and raise the engine slightly. We did this, and again, they gave you the disclosure at the beginning, but they also point out this is the only way to raise the engine. You're going to have to raise the oil pan, but you got to be very careful. Some models will have an electronic suspension sensor that might be in the way, so they're telling you might need to remove that. We didn't have that option. They worked through the wheelhouse opening. I showed you how you can work just from up on top and come in right from the directly above this guy, and then they talk about removing it towards the front of the vehicle, which is what we did. And then reinstalling it, they just simplify in one line that whole big dance that you're going to have to go through. This is a nice shot of the 4 fasteners on the underside of the engine block. Here's the oil pan, oil filter. Here's the reinforced area of the oil pan that we jacked up. And here's where they point out that 37 foot-pounds on those 4 bolts that are 15 millimeter that attach to the engine block. And let's see, remove your jack, remove your wood, then your 3 that attach to the frame. They talk about cleaning those bolts and then applying thread locker to them. They tell you to consult Section 928 for the particular type of thread locker. If we go back there, we can see that it's this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 8, 2. That's used on all of these fasteners that I showed you. And then torque those to 48 foot-pounds. And then they tell you to reinstall the steering shaft, heat shield. If you took it off, the liner, lower the vehicle, reinstall the cover, reconnect the battery, and you're done. The procedure for the L96 is different. We're not going to cover that here. And then I'll just show you the section of the manual dealing with the steering shaft. And here they tell you to secure the steering wheel with a special tool so that it doesn't move. We just use some bungee cords to keep its position so that it doesn't move. They talk to you about removing the special nut and bolt here. They don't show you removing the lower one because it's kind of obvious. Then when you reinstall it, they talk about 37 foot-pounds on the upper bolt and special nut, and 35 foot-pounds on the lower bolt and nut. And then after you get that out, you can take the anti-rotation pin, or if you're using a bungee or whatever you end up using to prevent the wheel from rotating, you can pull that out. And that's it for the service manual info. All right, guys, that's a wrap. We've got everything torqued back down. We've got everything back into position. We have taken it for a test drive, and the problem is solved. If this video helps you change out your own driver's side engine mount on a GMT 900 5.3 liter and how to inspect the other two, I'd appreciate you paying it forward by hitting that like button. If you got any questions or comments, leave them below and I'll try to help. And as always, thanks for watching.